Even though the second season of House of the Dragon had a lot of flaws, especially with character writing, Aegon II was not one of them. In truth, in my opinion, he was the best written character in the whole season, carrying the entire show on his back. This is surprising because he looks like a completely different character from his season 1 version. Even George R.R. Martin has praised Tom Glenn Carney's portrayal of the character. At first glance, he appears to be a spoiled brat who usurped his own sister, but there is so much more behind his character than it might seem, both in the show and in the book. Aegon was born in 106 AC to King Viserys I Targaryen and his second wife, Queen Alicent Hightower. Aegon had 3 older half-siblings, 2 brothers who died in infancy, and a sister, Rhaenyra, who had officially been appointed as Viserys' heir in late 105 AC, with hundreds of lords and landed knights having done obeisance to her and sworn solemn oaths to defend her rights. Aegon was named by his mother after Aegon the Conqueror. He would have 3 younger siblings, 2 brothers, Aemond and Daeron, and a sister, Helaena. Although King Viserys now had 3 sons, he refused to alter the succession and kept Rhaenyra as his heir, a decision he left in his will. Prince Daemon Targaryen, the king's younger brother, was notably cool towards Aegon and Aemond, as their births had pushed Daemon further down the line of succession. Aegon's mother, Queen Alicent, did not agree with her husband's decision to name Rhaenyra heir to the Iron Throne over Aegon. When her father, Sir Otto Hightower, continually encouraged Viserys to name Aegon his heir, he was stripped of his office as Hand of the King. When attempts to persuade the king to do otherwise failed, Alicent attempted to convince her husband to have Rhaenyra and Aegon marry. Viserys did not agree, as the 2 siblings were 10 years apart in age and had never gotten along. King Viserys knew that Alicent only proposed the match to get Aegon on the throne, and thus he married Rhaenyra to Sir Laenor Velaryon, heir to Driftmark, instead. Relations at court began to escalate as lords began to side with either Alicent or Rhaenyra, with many favoring the laws established at the Great Council of 101 AC, which declared that the Iron Throne could not pass to a woman. The 2 parties soon became known as the Greens and the Blacks, the former consisting of those in favor of Aegon inheriting the Iron Throne, while the latter favored Rhaenyra. The enmity between Queen Alicent and Princess Rhaenyra was passed on to their children. Aegon and his brothers did not get along with their Valyrian nephews and resented the 3 boys for having stolen their birthright, the Iron Throne itself. Prince Aegon was convinced that Rhaenyra's 3 Valyrian sons were fathered by Sir Harwin Strong and stated such to his brother Aemond. The 6 boys attended the same feasts, balls, and revels, and sometimes trained together under the same master-at-arms and studied under the same maesters. Archmaester Gildain believed that forcing Aegon and his siblings to be close to Rhaenyra's sons only caused their mutual dislike to grow. By the time he was 13 years old, Prince Aegon had become a dragon rider, having successfully bonded with the young Sunfire. After the deaths of their spouses, Prince Rhaenyra and Prince Daemon married. In 120 AC, Rhaenyra bore a son she named Aegon, intended to be a slight towards Prince Aegon, much to the wrath of Queen Alicent. In 122 AC, in accordance with the ancient tradition of House Targaryen, Prince Aegon the Elder married his sister, Princess Helaena Targaryen, in King's Landing. Their first children, the twins Prince Jaehaerys and Princess Jaehaera, were born a year later, as were 2 bastards. A boy Aegon had fathered on a girl whose maidenhead he had won at an auction in the Street of Silk, and a girl he had fathered on one of his mother's servants. In 127 AC, Helaena gave birth to Aegon's youngest son, Prince Maelor. Despite various attempts by King Viserys to get Aegon, his siblings, and their Valyrian nephews on friendlier terms, Aegon remained resentful of Rhaenyra's children. When at a feast on the first day of 127 AC, Prince Jaehaerys Velaryon asked Princess Helaena for a dance, Aegon took offense. They argued and might even have fought had the Kingsguard not intervened. Aegon's character was very oddly written in that season. He was not really much of a character. He did not have any interaction with Rhaenyra and appeared more like a side character, which is strange because the whole Dance of the Dragons is a rivalry between the siblings, not between daughter and stepmother. Aegon was never written as an ambitious character in the books, which kind of makes sense because he was like that in the book as well. However, besides the lack of ambition, he is definitely built up to be evil compared to his sister. From an early age, Aegon seems to be very indecent and unlikable. He constantly bullies his brother and talks badly about his sister. He is often drunk, unfaithful to his wife, watches his bastards fight in the rat pit, and to top it all off, he is a sex offender, which in the case of television is the ultimate way to make a character unlikable with no chance of redemption. Almost every single time he is on screen, he is punished, slapped around, and constantly told how he can do better and how almost everything is his fault for not viewing his sister as a real threat and for not protecting his brother before he lost an eye. Physical and mental abuse are very common with this character, as is neglect. Queen Alicent was not the only reason why the Green Boys resented the Blacks. King Viserys was at fault as well. The only time when we see Viserys caring for Aegon was when he was a little kid, but every single instance after that, he only appears to chastise him. When he becomes angry in the courtyard, he says that he is the one who called the Strong Boys bastards. Aegon said himself that Viserys did not like him, which speaks volumes about their relationship. Viserys' favoritism towards Rhaenyra was extremely visible. He cared more about who insulted Rhaenyra's kids than about his own son who lost an eye. In the show, the very first time we see Aegon after the time skip is after assaulting a maiden girl. This is a show-only thing to make Aegon look worse than he already is. This character does not even exist in the books and is a show-only invention. People often argue about how unreliable the Fire and Blood book is because it has 3 narrators: Septon Eustace, Grand Maester Munkun, and Mushroom. However, this is not true. The book always tells us if the story has contradictory information, and we are meant to take such tellings with a grain of salt, not dismiss the whole book itself. The show continued to make Aegon look even worse in the next scene. When King Viserys I Targaryen died in 129 AC, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen was still the heir to the Iron Throne. Since she was pregnant at Dragonstone when her father died, the Greens in King's Landing hid the news of Viserys' death, keeping the king's body in his room for 7 days until their preparations for Aegon's coronation were complete. With the exception of Lord Lyman Beesbury, the small council agreed to crown Aegon. When Alicent finally summoned Aegon to the Green Council, the Kingsguard did not find him in the rooms he shared with his wife Helaena. All 3 narrators had their accounts of where Aegon was. The account of Septon Eustace, a Green supporter who was biased to portray Aegon in a positive light, claimed Aegon was found abed with a well-kept paramour, the daughter of a wealthy trader. Grand Maester Munkun's true telling says Aegon was found at his revels. Mushroom is the only one who said that his quote-unquote revels were at a flea-bottom rat pit where feral children fought each other for the amusement of onlookers, while Aegon, drunk and naked, was pleasured by a young girl. Out of the 3, Mushroom is the most unreliable source since he was not in King's Landing in the first place, was a big supporter of Team Black, and always had the most out-of-touch and unrealistic reports. And for some reason, Ryan Condal and Sarah Hess based their portrayal of Aegon on Mushroom's report. What is even worse is that the show says that Aegon had sired several bastards by himself, and he was making them fight in the rat pit. Not even Mushroom says that, and just like the maiden girl, this was completely show only to make Aegon look far worse to whitewash Rhaenyra. However, a good thing is that the show at least kept the report of Eustace. According to him, Aegon at first refused to be a part of his mother's plans to crown him, insisting Rhaenyra was heir. However, Sir Criston Cole, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, convinced him that should Rhaenyra take the throne, Aegon and his brothers would be executed. Eustace insists that only this persuaded him to take the crown. On the appointed day, Sir Criston Cole placed the iron and ruby crown of Aegon the Conqueror upon the brow of the eldest son of King Viserys and Queen Alicent, proclaiming him Aegon of House Targaryen, second of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. His mother, Queen Alicent, beloved by the small folk, placed her own crown upon the head of her daughter, Helaena, Aegon's wife and sister. After kissing her cheeks, the mother knelt before the daughter, bowed her head, and said, "My queen." How many came to see the crowning remains a matter of dispute. Grand Maester Munkun, drawing upon Orwell, tells us that more than 100,000 small folk jammed into the Dragonpit, their cheers so loud they shook the very walls, whilst Mushroom says the stone benches were half filled. With the High Septon in Old Town, too old and frail to journey to King's Landing, it fell to Septon Eustace to anoint King Aegon's brow with holy oils and bless him in the 7 names of God. This whole scene was changed in the show as well, with the show producers having made several questionable alterations to it. Firstly, Aegon and Helena were crowned together. For some reasons, we do not see that, which makes little sense since Alicent was no longer queen. It was her daughter. Another questionable scene is Rhaenys ruining the coronation. This was a show-only creation as well because it makes little sense. Rhaenys killed a few hundred folks who did nothing wrong. This stupid decision would cost Team Black a lot of hate for the population of King's Landing, however, no one even mentions this. In subsequent episodes, when Team Green showcases Melee's head, the town is sad because that dragon is dead? Realistically, it makes zero sense, since if it happened to the real world, Melee's would be the most hated dragon in the entire city. According to Sarah Hess, the only reason why they did this scene is to give Rhaenys her girl boss moment, so we can see how little thought the writers are giving the show. However, this episode did some good on Aegon's part. On their way to the coronation, we can see Aegon and Alicent's dynamic perfectly. Aegon asks his mother if she even loves him, because Alicent does not view Aegon as Aegon, but as the soon-to-be king. She fails to realize that Aegon looks the most like her. Similar to how Alicent was groomed by her parents to be queen, she did the same to Aegon. She most likely sees that as well, and that could be the reason why she loves Aegon the least among her children. Her self-hatred could be the reason for it. During the coronation, we see Aegon for the first time receiving love, not from his family, but from his people, which is why he becomes so excited and determined to be a good king. He is a man without love, and for the first time, he feels genuine love and respect. There is no way he is going to let down the people who love and respect him. A few of those in attendance with sharper eyes than most might have noticed that there were only 4 white cloaks in attendance for the new king, not 5 as before. Aegon II had suffered his first defections the night before, when Sir Steffan Darklyn of the Kingsguard had slipped from the city with his squire, 2 stewards, and 4 guardsmen. Under the cover of darkness, they made their way out through a postern gate to where a fisherman's skiff awaited to take them to Dragonstone. They brought with them a stolen crown, a band of yellow gold ornamented with 7 gems of different colors. This was the crown King Viserys had worn, and the old King Jaehaerys before him. After the coronation, the remaining Kingsguard escorted Aegon to his mount, a splendid creature with gleaming golden scales and pale pink wing membranes. Sunfire was the name given to this dragon of the Golden Dawn. Muncan tells us the king flew thrice around the city before landing inside the walls of the Red Keep. Sir Eric Cargill led his grace into the torchlit throne room where Aegon II mounted the steps of the Iron Throne before 1,000 lords and knights. Shouts rang through the hall. On Dragonstone, no cheers were heard. Instead, screams echoed through the halls and stairways of Sea Dragon Tower, down from the Queen's apartments where Rhaenyra Targaryen strained and shuddered in her 3rd day of labor. The child had not been due for another turn of the moon, but the tidings from King's Landing had driven the princess into a black fury, and her rage seemed to bring on the birth, as if the babe inside her were angry too, fighting to get out. When the babe at last came forth, she proved indeed a monster. A stillborn girl, twisted and malformed, with a hole in her chest where her heart should have been, and a stubby, scaled tail. Or so Mushroom describes her. The dead girl had been named Visenya, Princess Rhaenyra announced the next day when Milk of the Poppy had blunted the edge of her pain. She was my only daughter, and they killed her. They stole my crown and murdered my daughter, and they shall answer for it. And so the dance began as the princess called a council of her own. The Black Council, the true-telling names that gathered on Dragonstone, setting it against the Green Council of King's Landing. Rhaenyra herself presided, seated between her uncle and husband, Prince Daemon, and her trusted counselor, Maester Gerardus. Her 3 sons were present with them, though none had reached the age of manhood. Jason was 14, Luke 13, Joffrey 11. 2 Kingsguard stood between them, Sir Eric Cargill, twin to Sir Eric, and the Westerman, Sir Laurent Marbrand. Those who sat at the Black Council counted themselves loyalists, but knew full well that King Aegon II would name them traitors. Each had already received a summons from King's Landing, demanding they present themselves at the Red Keep to swear oaths of loyalty to the new king. All their hosts combined could not match the power that the Hightowers alone could field. Aegon's Greens enjoyed other advantages as well. Old Town, King's Landing, and Lannisport were the largest and richest cities in the realm. All 3 were held by Greens. Every visible symbol of legitimacy belonged to Aegon. He sat on the Iron Throne, he lived in the Red Keep, he wore the Conqueror's crown, wielded the Conqueror's sword, and had been anointed by a Septon of the Faith before the eyes of tens of thousands. Grand Maester Orwyl sat in his councils, and the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard had placed the crown upon his princely head. And he was male, which, in the eyes of many, made him the rightful king, his half-sister the usurper. Against all that, Rhaenyra's advantages were few. Some older lords might yet recall the oaths they had sworn when she was made Princess of Dragonstone and named her father's heir. There had been a time when she was well loved by highborn and commoners alike, when they cheered her as the realm's delight. Many a young lord and noble knight had sought her favor then, though how many would still fight for her now that she was a woman wed, her body aged and thickened by 6 childbirths, was a question none could answer. Though her half-brother had looted their father's treasury, the princess had at her disposal the wealth of House Valerian, and the Sea Snake's fleets gave her superiority at sea. Her consort, Prince Daemon, tried and tempered in the Stepstones, had more experience in warfare than all their foes combined. Last but not least, Rhaenyra had her dragons. A hasty coronation was held the next day. 300 sets of eyes looked on as Prince Daemon Targaryen placed the old king's crown on the head of his wife, proclaiming her Rhaenyra of House Targaryen, first of her name, Queen of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. The prince claimed for himself the title of Protector of the Realm, and Rhaenyra named her eldest son, Jacaerys, the Prince of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne. Word of Rhaenyra's coronation reached the Red Keep the next day, to the great displeasure of Aegon II. "My half-sister and my uncle are guilty of high treason," the young king declared. "I want them attainted, I want them arrested, and I want them dead." Cooler heads on the Green Council wished to parley. "The princess must be made to see that her cause is hopeless," Grand Maester Orwyl said. "A brother should not war against a sister. Send me to her, that we may talk and reach an amicable accord." Aegon would not hear of it. Septon Eustace tells us that his grace accused the Grand Maester of disloyalty and spoke of having him thrown into a black cell with your black friends. But when the two queens, his mother Queen Alicent and his wife Queen Helena, spoke in favor of Orwyl's proposal, the truculent king gave way reluctantly. So Grand Maester Orwyl was dispatched across Blackwater Bay under a peace banner, leading a retinue that included Sir Eric Cargill of the Kingsguard and Sir Gawain Hightower of the Goldcloaks, along with a score of scribes and septons, among them Eustace. The terms offered by the king were generous, Monkun declares in his True Telling. If the princess would acknowledge him as king and make obeisance before the Iron Throne, Aegon II would confirm her possession of Dragonstone and allow the island and castle to pass to her son Jacaerys upon her death. Her second son, Lucerys, would be recognized as the rightful heir of Driftmark and the lands and holdings of House Valerian. Her boys by Prince Daemon, Aegon the Younger, and Viserys would be given places of honor at court, the former as the king's squire, the latter as his cupbearer. Pardons would be granted to those lords and knights who had conspired treasonously with her against their true king. Rhaenyra heard these terms in stony silence, then asked Orwyl if he remembered her father, King Viserys. "Of course, your grace," the maester answered. "Perhaps you can tell us who he named as his heir and successor," the queen said, her crown upon her head. "You, your grace," Orwyl replied. Rhaenyra nodded and said, "With your own tongue you admit I am your lawful queen. Why then do you serve my half-brother, the Pretender?" Monkun tells us that Orwyl gave a long and erudite reply, citing Andal law and the Great Council of 101. Mushroom claims he stammered and voided his bladder. Whichever is true, his answer did not satisfy Princess Rhaenyra. "A Grand Maester should know the law and serve it," she told Orwyl. "You are no Grand Maester, and you bring only shame and dishonor to that chain you wear." As Orwyl protested feebly, Rhaenyra's knights stripped his chain of office from his neck and forced him to his knees, while the princess bestowed the chain upon her own man, Maester Gerardus, a true and leal servant of the realm and its laws. As she sent Orwyl and the other envoys on their way, Rhaenyra said, "Tell my half-brother that I will have my throne, or I will have his head." Aegon II was 22, quick to anger and slow to forgive. Rhaenyra's refusal to accept his rule enraged him. "I offered her an honorable place, and the whore spat in my face," he declared. "What happens next is on her own head." What happened next was war. Aegon had been proclaimed king of the Dragonpit, Rhaenyra queen of Dragonstone. All efforts at reconciliation having failed, the dance of the dragons now began in earnest. The Greens had a number of advantages over the Blacks. They had secured the Iron Throne and the support of the realm's most important officials in their opening moves. They also had more forces available at their disposal, even if one considered only the hosts that Lord Ormond, Sir Otto's nephew, could command as Lord of Oldtown. They also had great wealth from their supporters. The three largest cities in the Seven Kingdoms, King's Landing, Oldtown, and Lannisport, were all held by the Greens. Against that, the Blacks had House Valyrian's wealth and vast fleet, Prince Daemon's experience, thanks to his long campaign in the Stepstones, and their dragons. Aegon and his siblings commanded only 4 full-grown dragons. Aegon's Sunfire, Aemond's Vagar, the largest living dragon at this point, Helena's Dreamfire, and Daryon's Tessarion. Rhaenyra's side had twice that number. Rhaenyra's Syrax, Daemon's Caraxes, Jacaerys' Vermax, Lucerys' Arax, Joffrey's Tyraxes, Aegon the Younger's Stormcloud, as yet unridden by the youth, Rhaenys' Melees, and Baela's Moondancer, still too small to carry a rider. Early in the war, Prince Aemond slew Prince Lucerys Valerian over Storm's End while Lucerys was attempting to win Boros Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, over to his mother's side. Upon Aemond's return, having ensured Storm's End's support, Aegon welcomed his brother with a great feast, though Queen Alicent and her father, Sir Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King, were concerned about the extent of Aemond's actions. And this is how the first season of House of the Dragons ended. The second season starts with the early rule of Aegon II. We can see how he is presented as having the capacity to be kind and caring. He wants to do right by the people around him who did right by him, especially the common folk, because as I said earlier, they accepted Aegon as no one else did throughout his entire life. They gave him the unconditional love he never got from his mother and father, which is why he was so caring towards them when they met him. Another instance where we see Aegon's kind side is with his son, Jaehaerys. He loves his son a lot and is visibly happy when he is around him. He is proud of Jaehaerys simply because of his existence, which is quite contradictory to his relationship with his own father. Because he had Viserys as a bad example, he tries to give his son what he was not getting from his father, fatherly love, which makes Daemon's revenge against Aegon even sadder. Prince Daemon, once called the Prince of the City, still had friends and secret allies both at court and within King's Landing. One he entrusted completely was his former lover, Mysaria, the White Worm, who knew every wicked place in the city to which he had returned. He sent word to her, and she arranged his revenge, finding 2 agents, a sergeant and former Goldcloak known as Blood, and a ratcatcher known as Cheese. The ratcatcher knew the secret doorways and tunnels of the Red Keep so intimately that he could lead his companion into the Tower of the Hand without raising any alarm. They made their way to Queen Alicent's room, bound and gagged her, and strangled her bedmaid. Then they waited. When Queen Helena arrived with her 3 children, Aegon's heir Jaehaerys, his sister Jaehaera, and the 2-year-old Maelor to visit their grandmother as they did most days, Blood and Cheese seized them. They told Helena they were there to collect a debt and asked her which of her 2 sons should die. Though the queen begged that they kill her instead, Blood and Cheese replied that they were specifically tasked with killing a son. Helena, in tears, chose Maelor, so Blood turned and killed Prince Jaehaerys before his mother's eyes, striking his head off. Helena screamed and the men fled, carrying the prince's head. Blood was captured 2 days later, still with Jaehaerys' head hidden in a sack. He was put to the question and tortured, eventually admitting that he had been promised a reward from Prince Daemon by the woman who hired him, a pale foreigner that the harlots in the city called Misery. 13 days of torment passed before Blood was at last allowed to die. Neither Cheese nor Mysaria were ever found, and in a fit of pique, King Aegon II had all the ratcatchers in the city hanged. Poor Queen Helena never recovered from the horror of what she had been forced to do, and what she had witnessed. However, in the show, this scene was a little different. Maelor was not present in the show at all, which became one of the biggest problems even George R.R. Martin had with the writing stuff, since his absence later creates very big butterfly effects in the story. Beside that, in the books, Helena offers to kill her instead of making her choose between her sons to Blood and Cheese, but in the show she just offers them a necklace and seems to be over her son's death after some time, while in the books, that traumatic experience forever changed her. The show's portrayal of Aegon's grief offers a nuanced and intense depiction of his anguish as a father, a depth that resonates more powerfully than the book's portrayal. Through subtle expressions tones and dialogue, the show allows the audience to feel Aegon's profound vulnerability and guilt, particularly his sense of weakness and failure in not being able to protect his beloved son, one of the few sources of genuine love in his life. In a moment of raw despair, Aegon cries out, "My son is my legacy. My son is heir to the Iron Throne," pointedly using the present tense as though Jaehaerys were still alive. This small but significant detail underscores his inability to accept the reality of his son's death. He speaks as if Jaehaerys' place in the world remains unchanged, reflecting his unwillingness or inability to confront his loss. Yet even as he wrestles with this devastating grief, Aegon is denied the space to mourn properly. His son's death is immediately seized as a tool of political propaganda, manipulated by his family members to galvanize their cause against the Blacks and bolster Aegon's image as a strong, unyielding king. Tragically, Aegon isn't even permitted to attend Jaehaerys' funeral. He is left isolated, abandoned to process his emotions alone. Even his own mother, who once wielded emotional manipulation over him by cruelly asserting, "You are not my son," offers no solace in his time of greatest need. This cold indifference from his family heightens his despair, leaving him unsupported in what is likely the most harrowing moment of his life. As Aegon's grief festers, he begins to unravel, consumed by rage and the need for retribution. In a rash and brutal display of grief-fueled wrath, he orders the execution of every ratcatcher in King's Landing, a symbolic but senseless act of vengeance that, while morally and politically indefensible, captures the irrationality of his pain. This violent outburst, though terrible in its consequences, serves as a grim testament to the depth of his anguish. From the perspective of a grieving father, his actions, however extreme, may seem almost incomprehensible. If faced with the murder of one's child, where do the boundaries of vengeance truly lie? In his overwhelming sorrow, Aegon lashes out at the world, attempting to achieve a semblance of justice for his son's tragic death, even if this justice only deepens his own suffering and fractures his reign further. When King Aegon sullenly demanded that his grandfather do something about all these traitorous houses, Sir Otto took aim at the Valyrian blockade by appealing to the kingdom of the Three Daughters, who had no cause to love Lord Corlys or Prince Daemon. The Council of Magisters from the free cities of Lys, Myr, and Tyrosh agreed to consider the matter, but their decision-making was slow and laborious. In a rage, Aegon stripped Sir Otto of the office of Hand and named Sir Criston Cole in his stead. Their first act together was to go to the dungeons and appeal to the imprisoned lords that had refused to bend the knee, giving them a final chance. Lords Butterwell, Stokeworth, and Rosby were the only captive lords who chose to forswear their oaths to Rhaenyra and bend the knee to Aegon. Lords Hayford, Merryweather, Hart, Buckler, and Caswell, as well as Lady Fell, 8 landed knights and 20 retainers and servants, preferred death before the dishonor of breaking their word. They were swiftly dispatched by the king's justice. Otto's dismissal in the show was different as well. In the show, Otto and Aegon have an argument about his decision to execute ratcatchers. Otto calls him, a new king, a fool and says that in truth, it was he who made him a king, not Viserys, and completely kills the idea that Viserys might have actually loved Aegon, which could be the reason why he chose him. But Otto completely dismissed this idea and took away the little comfort that that possibility could have given Aegon. Aegon realizes that even after becoming king, no one really respects him. His ideas are completely overlooked and he is completely overshadowed by his little brother. When Cole and Aemond were discussing the Battle of Rook's Rest, no one really told him anything. They did not think that it was necessary to tell the king about one of the most important battles, while in the books, he was said to be one of the main contributors to his planning. The reason why Aegon is constantly ignored and seems to be an ineffective leader is that no one really prepared Aegon for ruling, even though it was the sole reason for his birth. The Greens liked the idea of Aegon as quote-unquote king who would be easily manipulated and controlled. His own mother tells him that he does not really have real value, which is one of the reasons why he went to Rook's Rest. He wanted to prove both to himself and his doubters that he is a worthy king, a king who fights his own battles. However, this seemed to not be such a good decision from him. Leading a company 2,000 strong, Sir Criston marched to Rosby and Stokeworth, where those newly loyal lords were forced to add their strength to his. At Duskendale, his forces stormed the town, sacking it and setting the ships in its harbor aflame. Lord Darklyn was beheaded. Rook's Rest, the seat of House Staunton, was next. Forewarned, Lord Staunton closed his gates and was able to dispatch a raven to Dragonstone before the siege began. 9 days after Lord Staunton sent his raven, Meleys the Red Queen appeared in the sky, with Princess Rhaenys on her back. Sir Criston Cole had prepared for this and had archers and crossbowmen at the ready, as well as scorpions to throw heavy iron bolts. Meleys was struck several times, but still she swept down low over the host, her flames setting both men and horses alight. As Meleys snatched up a stallion in her jaws, roaring, an answering roar greeted her. King Aegon himself had come to battle on the back of the Golden Sunfire, and with him was Aemond on Vhagar. Despite the odds, Rhaenys did not flee, instead turning Meleys to meet them. Witnesses saw the dragons dance 1,000 feet above the battlefield, flames streaking across the sky. Meleys' jaws closed around Sunfire's neck, at which point Vhagar dove down and sent all 3 dragons plummeting to the ground. Aemond and Vhagar were the only ones to emerge from that final battle of blood and fire unscathed. Meleys was broken by the fall and torn to pieces, with what was likely Rhaenys' body burned beyond recognition beside her corpse. As for Aegon and Sunfire, the king had broken several ribs and a hip and suffered burns on over half his body. The worst being his left arm, where the dragonfire had melted his armor into his flesh, and Sunfire had a wing half torn from his body. In the aftermath, hundreds of knights, men-at-arms, and squires lost their lives, and 100 more died when Sir Criston seized Rook's Rest and put the garrison to the sword. Lord Staunton's head was carried to King's Landing, as was Meleys's. King Aegon II did not die, though his burns caused him such pain that some say he prayed for death. Carried back to King's Landing in a closed litter to hide the extent of his injuries, his grace did not rise from his bed for the rest of the year. Septons prayed for him, and maesters attended him with potions and milk of the poppy, but Aegon slept 9 hours out of every 10, waking only long enough to take some meager nourishment before he slept again. None were allowed to disturb his rest save his mother, the Queen Dowager, and his hand, Sir Criston Cole. His wife never so much as made the attempt, so lost was Helaena in her own grief and madness. The king's dragon, Sunfire, too huge and heavy to be moved and unable to fly with his injured wing, remained in the fields beyond Rook's Rest, crawling through the ashes like some great golden worm. In the early days, he fed himself upon the burned carcasses of the slain. When those were gone, the men Sir Criston had left behind to guard him brought him calves and sheep. However, in the show, Aegon believes that Sunfire is dead as well. He was most likely going through the same self-hatred and weakness that he was feeling after the death of his son. Sunfire had given him a great deal of joy, and Aegon truly loved his dragon. Now, another loved one was dead because of his weakness and inability to protect. The fact that even though his life was constantly unfair to him, yet he never gives up for it, is one of the main reasons why I think his character feels so human. In the show adaptation, the relationship dynamics between Aemond and Aegon diverge significantly from their portrayal in the books. In the books, Aemond and Aegon are depicted as being exceptionally close, with a relationship marked by mutual support and camaraderie rather than rivalry and jealousy. There is no indication that Aegon ever tormented Aemond or treated him with disdain. If anything, their bond is a foundation of mutual loyalty, which later motivates Aegon's desire to honor Aemond and Daeron with statues after their deaths. However, in the show, their interactions are reimagined to reflect a more antagonistic sibling rivalry. Here, Aegon is seen belittling Aemond periodically, which fosters an intense sense of jealousy within the younger brother. Driven to prove his worth and overshadow Aegon, Aemond becomes not only a formidable warrior but also a master tactician. His exceptional skill in combat, coupled with his deep connection to Vhagar, the largest and most powerful dragon known, reveals a desire to outshine his elder brother and assert his own superiority. The scene where the brothers have a conversation in Valyrian is a very good representation of the characters, showing how much better suited Aemond is as a Targaryen ruler compared to his brother. This sense of rivalry even leads Aemond to contemplate and eventually attempt a crippling blow against Aegon, a move designed to incapacitate him and thus secure Aemond's ascension to power. Such a drastic turn is absent from the original source material, where no evidence supports any malice or ambition of this kind. The closest hint, perhaps, lies in the account of the king's hand advising Aemond, "You must rule the realm now until your brother is strong enough to take the crown again." Nor did Sir Criston need to say it twice, as recorded by Eustace. This remark leads Aemond to briefly adopt the title of Protector of the Realm, and Prince Regent humorously remarking that the crown looks better on me than it ever did on him. While this line might be intended as light-hearted banter, the showrunners interpret it as an undercurrent of ambition, crafting a narrative where Aemond's rivalry with his brother intensifies, culminating in actions that align with his desire to usurp Aegon. This adaptation choice reconfigures Aemond into a character driven by personal ambition and conflict, adding a darker complexity to his portrayal. Aemond proved to be easily predictable as a leader. With Daemon's master plan, they lured Aemond and Sir Criston Cole out of King's Landing, leaving the city without their biggest powers, which allowed Rhaenyra to infiltrate the city. The dragons arrived one by one, circling the city or perching on its walls and towers. The Dowager Queen Alicent surrendered with her father, Sir Otto Hightower, as well as Sir Tyland Lannister and Lord Jasper Wilde. Lord Larys Strong, the Master of Whisperers, had vanished. Alicent suggested the gathering of a great council to decide the succession, but Rhaenyra rejected the offer. So Queen Alicent at last bent the knee to Rhaenyra. Queen Helena, broken and pitiful, was found locked in her bedchamber, but King Aegon II could not be found at all. He had fled the city. His surviving children, Jaehaera and Maelor, were gone as well, as were the Kingsguard knights Sir Willis Fell and Sir Rickard Thorne. After Daemon's death, King's Landing slowly fell deeper into crisis with each passing day. Every new betrayal left Queen Rhaenyra more isolated, and every new rumor of disaster drove still more followers to the Shepherd, who preached in Cobbler's Square. Thanks to Rhaenyra's treatment of Sir Adam and her arrest of Lord Corlys, even those sworn to House Valerian began to abandon the Queen. 2 knights attempted to free the sea snake, though they were caught and hanged from the walls for their troubles. That same night, Queen Helena threw herself from a window in Maegor's holdfast, dying on the iron spikes in the dry moat below. Rumors ran through the city that she had been murdered by Sir Luthor Largent at Rhaenyra's command, to make sure Prince Daeron would have no joyous reunion with his sister when he took the city. Though the rumor was almost certainly baseless, it was enough to set off a riot that began in Flea Bottom and spread throughout the city. No shop or home was safe, and no one was spared regardless of their sex or station. Lord Bartimos Celtigar, the hated master of coin, was set upon in his manse. After his defenders were dispatched, he was tied to a post, tortured, gelded, and finally beheaded. The chaos in King's Landing was unbearable. In order to survive, Rhaenyra had to escape the city with her only 2 remaining sons, Viserys and Aegon. As Rhaenyra approached the castle, the first thing she saw was the burned corpse of Sir Robert hanging from the battlements alongside other members of her former household. Even Grand Maester Gerardus was dead, though all that was displayed was his head and his upper torso. Everything below his ribs was gone, and the Grand Maester's entrails dangled down from his torn belly like so many burned black snakes. Before Rhaenyra and her son could run, Broom and his men cut down Rhaenyra's protectors, including the last 3 of her Queen's Guard. And when Rhaenyra and Aegon were marched through the gates of the castle, they found themselves facing the long-vanished King Aegon II and his dragon, Sunfire. What Rhaenyra had not known was that Lord Larys Strong, the Clubfoot, had personally led Aegon the Elder and his children out of the Red Keep, using the secret passages created by Maegor the Cruel. He then separated them for their safety. The Clubfoot reasoned that Rhaenyra would never think to send men to search for her brother on Dragonstone, as it was her own seat. He thus sent the king on a fishing skiff, escorted by Sir Marston Waters, a bastard knight with kin on Dragonstone. They were in fact the alleged cousins brought ashore by Tom Tanglebeard and his son Tom Tangletongue, in search of the dragons that sailors had been fighting. Sunfire's journey had been even less straightforward. The wounded dragon was slow to recover after the battle with melees at Rook's Rest, unable to fly due to his broken wing, yet the dragon somehow managed to crawl away from Rook's Rest and make short flights from hillside to hillside at Crackclaw Point. How Sunfire came to reach Dragonstone is unknown, though some speculate that the dragon might well have swum. Once in residence, Sunfire made a lair and then took to the sky to battle and kill the Grey Host. Sir Marsden helped King Aegon locate his dragon, then with the 2 Toms ventured to find supporters while the king remained in hiding. Once they had won Sir Alfred Broom's aid with promises of lordship, lands, and wealth, they took the castle within the span of an hour. The attack was almost perfect, save for Baela Targaryen. The young lady slipped out of her window as Tom Tangletongue tried to smash down her door, and she ran to where Moondancer was stabled. The young queen dragon leapt into the sky, but King Aegon was already mounted on Sunfire. In the darkness, the dragons fought, with Moondancer using her nimbleness and speed to dodge flames and jaws and claws, raking the still wounded Sunfire repeatedly. It took only one blast of Sunfire's golden flames to find its mark, however, and so Moondancer was blinded. The two dragons slammed into one another and fell, with Moondancer's teeth locked around Sunfire's neck. When they crashed to the earth, they fought on. Moondancer was killed, and Sunfire was severely wounded, never to fly again. Matters were little better for their riders. King Aegon II managed to leap from the saddle before the dragons fell, but both of his legs were shattered. Lady Baela remained on Moondancer's back and was burned and battered. Sir Alfred Broom drew his sword to kill her as she lay defenseless, but Sir Marston Waters stopped him and had Tom Tangletongue carry her to a maester. When the captured Grand Maester Gerardus offered milk of the poppy to ease the king's pain, Aegon lashed out against his sister's creature. At the king's command, the chain that Princess Rhaenyra had torn from Grand Maester Orwell's neck and given to Gerardus was now used to hang him. Once he was dead, his corpse was dangled before Sunfire, who ate the lower half of his body. The other bodies were likewise hung from the walls to give his sister an appropriate greeting, and so matters stood until Rhaenyra arrived. The accounts of the words that passed between brother and sister are not in agreement, so no one will ever know how these two warring monarchs greeted each other at the end of their dance. But what is certain is that Aegon II had Rhaenyra fed alive to Sunfire while her son, Aegon the Younger, was forced to watch. So ended Rhaenyra Targaryen, once the realm's delight and now the half-year queen. It was the 22nd day of the 10th moon of the 130th year after Aegon's conquest, and she was 33 years old. But though his greatest rival was dead, Aegon II's reign was far from secure. Between him and the Iron Throne lay the Valyrian fleet, still opposed to his rule, even if they had abandoned Rhaenyra. The king had ravens dispatched at Driftmark, offering pardons if Alan of Hull presented himself and swore allegiance. However, the king delayed any plans to make the journey himself, in the hope that Sunfire could somehow recover from his latest wounds. It was a vain hope. Sunfire the Golden, one of the most magnificent dragons to have ever soared over the Seven Kingdoms, expired on the 9th day of the 12th moon of 130 AC. King Aegon wept, and in his wrath ordered Lady Baela brought up from the dungeons to be executed. Only when her head was on the block did he repent, for his maester reminded him that the girl's mother had been a Valyrian, the sea snake's own daughter. Another raven took wing to Driftmark, this time with a threat. Unless Alan of Hull presented himself within a fortnight to do homage to his rightful liege, his cousin Lady Baela would lose her head. While the king waited, the moon of the Three Kings came to its end when Lord Boros Baratheon, who had long absented himself from the fighting under the pretext of chasing after Dornish raiders and a new Vulture King, appeared with a host of Stormlanders. Once he heard of Rhaenyra's death, he rode north with 600 knights and 4,000 foot. The shepherd tried to order his flock to take a stand against the Baratheon army, but by this time only a few hundred followers still adhered to him. King Trystane Truefire, as he was now called, knew he stood no chance against Boros's forces, so he allowed Larys Strong, along with Grand Maester Orwell and the Dowager Queen Alicent, to parley with Lord Boros on his behalf. Alicent wept tears of joy when she learned that her granddaughter Jaehaera, the only surviving child of her son Aegon and daughter Helena, had been delivered safely to Storm's End by Sir Willis Fell of the Kingsguard. The Clubfoot promised that Sir Perkin and his Gutter Knights would join the Stormlanders in restoring King Aegon II to the throne on the condition that all of them, save the pretender Trystane, would be pardoned for all offenses, including high treason, rebellion, robbery, murder, and rape. The The erstwhile king was already in chains, waiting in a dungeon for his fate to be decided. Queen Alicent agreed that her son King Aegon would make Lady Cassandra, Lord Borros's eldest daughter, his new queen. Lady Floris, another of his lordship's daughters, was to be betrothed to Larys Strong. With that decided, Lord Borros began to restore order to King's Landing. The day after his welcoming feast, he led his men to seize Gaemon Palehair, now 5 years old, and with him his mother Essie, her lover Sylvena Sand, and most of his court. The next night, the shepherd was arrested in the Dragonpit, abandoned by most of his followers. Peace was largely restored, but the Valyrians of Driftmark remained a concern. The Dowager Queen Alicent and Lord Larys Strong had offered Lord Corlys his freedom, a pardon for his treason, and a place on the small council. Lord Corlys had countered by requesting pardons for all the men who had fought for Rhaenyra, the release of Lady Baella from captivity, the legitimizing of Alan of Hull as Alan Velaryon and his heir, and the betrothal of Aegon the Younger to Princess Jaehaera, Aegon II's only remaining true-born child. Though Queen Alicent initially objected, the agreement was struck and Lord Corlys pledged his loyalty and that of House Velaryon. Ravens were sent to spread the word, and toward the end of the year, King Aegon II finally entered King's Landing. King Aegon's arrival was not a triumphant moment as, still unable to walk, he was carried up through silent and deserted streets in a litter. Maneuvering him up the steps of the Iron Throne proved an impossibility thanks to his twisted and shattered legs, so he held court from a carved seat at its base. His first act was to deal with the three kings. Trystane Truefire was defiant until he saw that Sir Perkin the Flea, the man who had crowned him, had betrayed him. Trystane asked the boon that he die a knight, and King Aegon granted it. Sir Marston Waters dubbed him Sir Trystane Fire before Sir Alfred Broom beheaded him with Blackfire. Gaemon Palehair, due to his extreme youth, was spared and became a ward of the crown, but his mother, Sylvena Sand, and 27 members of their sham court were hanged. Finally, the shepherd was brought before the king. His insolence infuriated Aegon, who had his tongue ripped out. He was then condemned to a death by fire. On the last day of 130 AC, 241 barefoot lambs, the shepherd's most fervid and devoted followers, were covered with pitch and chained to poles along the broad, cobbled thoroughfare that ran eastward from Cobbler's Square up to the Dragonpit. As the city's septs rang their bells to signal the end of the old year and the coming of the new, King Aegon II proceeded along the street, thereafter known as Shepherd's Way rather than Hill Street as before, in his litter, while his knights rode to either side, setting their torches to the captive lambs to light his way. At the very top, the shepherd himself was bound amongst the heads of the 5 dragons he had killed. Supported by 2 of his Kingsguard, King Aegon rose from his cushions and set the prophet aflame with his own hand. With his half-sister slain, and her only surviving son a captive at his own court, King Aegon II might reasonably have expected the remaining opposition to his rule to melt away, and it might have done so if his grace had heeded Lord Velaryon's counsel and issued a general pardon for all those lords and knights who had espoused the queen's cause. But alas, the king was not of a forgiving mind. Urged on by his mother, the Dowager Queen Alicent, Aegon II was determined to exact vengeance upon those who had betrayed and deposed him. He started with the Stormlands. Lord Borros and his Stormlanders marched against the seats and villages nearest to King's Landing, forcing those that had raised Rhaenyra's banner to surrender. Their lords and castellans were sent to King's Landing to make obeisance, pay ransoms, and surrender hostages. Unfortunately, this merely hardened the hearts of the lords who had supported Rhaenyra. Lord Stark's promised host of Northmen was gathering its strength unabated. Lord Elmo Tully, having at last succeeded his grandfather Lord Grover, called the banners of the River Lords. Even Lord Bracken of Stonehenge answered the call, despite having supported Aegon II through the war. Near 10,000 more men were gathering at Lady Jane Arryn's command, for she had hired Braavosi ships to carry them to King's Landing. The Green Council was deeply divided as to the best way to respond to the gathering strength of Rhaenyra's followers. Lord Corlys persisted in advising reconciliation and peace, but Borros Baratheon believed he could defeat all the traitors in battle, so long as he had sufficient men. Sir Tywin Lannister, the blind master of coin, suggested finding sellswords in the free cities, but the Sea Snake retorted that the best free companies were already under contract by various employers of the free cities, and in any case it would take too long for them to arrive from across the narrow sea. He again urged peace, counseling Aegon to name Aegon the Younger, Rhaenyra's surviving son, as his heir, betrothing the young prince to his daughter Jaehaera. No one heeded him, however. Though Queen Alicent had negotiated that very match outside the walls of King's Landing, Aegon II preferred that his nephew have no sons at all, wanting him to either take the black and live out his days on the wall, or accept gelding and become a eunuch servant. Sir Tywin argued that so long as Prince Aegon lived, the king and his heirs would never be safe, and instead suggested killing Aegon the Younger. Lord Corlys, horrified, stormed out of the council. Only the intervention of Lord Larys Strong changed the course of the debate, for he noted that if the Sea Snake defected, it would lose them Alan Valerian and his ships. He suggested announcing Aegon the Younger as heir and betrothing him to Jaehaera as a means of winning over their foes, then biding their time before they could rid themselves of him. The council accepted his advice, and Larys the Clubfoot privately spoke to Lord Corlys and convinced him to go along with the plan. Still, the enemy armies gathered and marched. In the north, Lord Cragen Stark was leading a host down the neck. Of greater concern was the army from the Riverlands, now led by the young and headstrong Kermit Tully, after his father, Lord Elmo, drank bad water on the march and expired. 2 days out from King's Landing, the two armies met. Lord Boros commanded the Stormlanders, their strength augmented by levies from castles in the Crownlands and 2,000 men and boys from Fleabottom, who were hastily armed with spears and iron pot helms. It had been raining, and the ground near the King's Road was soft and muddy. Still, Lord Boros was confident of victory, for his scouts had told him that the rivermen were led by boys and women, so he launched an attack at dusk. His confidence, as it happened, was misplaced. Lord Boros led the charge of his knights himself, but it was into the teeth of a disciplined, battle-tested enemy who set a firm wall of shields and spears across the King's Road, while archers on a hillside rained down arrows. The Battle of the King's Road, the histories would call it, but the men who fought it called it the Muddy Mess. By any name, the last battle of the Dance of the Dragons would prove to be a one-sided affair. The longbows on the hill shot the horses out from under Lord Boros' knights as they charged, bringing down so many that less than half his riders ever reached the shield wall. Those that did found their ranks disordered, their wedge broken, their horses slipping and struggling in the soft mud. Though the Stormlanders wreaked great havoc with lance and sword and long axe, the Riverlords held firm as new men stepped up to fill the place of those who fell. When Lord Baratheon's foot came crashing into the fray, it seemed as if the tide of the battle might turn, until the wood to the left of the road erupted with shouts and screams, and hundreds more rivermen burst from the trees, led by 13-year-old Benjicot Blackwood, who would be known as Bloody Ben for the rest of his long life. When Lord Boros saw the battle slipping away, he signaled his reserve to advance. Upon hearing the horn, however, the men of Rosby, Stokeworth, and Hayford remained unmoving. The rabble from King's Landing scattered like geese, and the Knights of Duskendale went over to the foe, attacking the Stormlanders in the rear. The battle turned to rout in half a heartbeat, as King Aegon's last army shattered. Boros Baratheon died fighting, but die he did. Back in King's Landing, the defeat left the Green Council scrambling to find some way to protect the city, but there were no fresh armies coming to defend the king. Casterly Rock, Highgarden, and Oldtown had all offered excuses and prevarications in place of promises. Sir Tywin Lannister, Sir Marston Waters, and Sir Julian Wormwood had been dispatched to Pentos, Tyrosh, and Mere to raise sellswords, but they had not yet returned. The Riverlords were advancing on the city, Lord Stark's forces were mere days behind, and word arrived that Lady Jane's Valemen had left Gulltown and were sailing to the Gullet. The Sea Snake now urged surrender, but Queen Alicent convinced her son to use threats against Aegon the Younger to stop their enemies. Aegon ordered Sir Alfred Broom to cut off the prince's ear and have it taken to the Riverlords, warning that every mile they marched would lose the boy another body part. However, Aegon II did not reckon on the turncoats within the Red Keep, As Sir Alfred Broom attempted to cross the drawbridge to Maegor's Holdfast to carry out his king's bidding, he was confronted by Sir Perkin the Flea and his gutter knights, who flung him down onto the iron spikes below, where he twisted for 2 days until he died. Concurrently, Lord Larris's agents spirited Lady Baela to safety. Within mere hours, over 20 men were murdered by Lord Larris and his fellow conspirators so quietly that the court did not realize what was going on. In the end, the Dowager Queen herself was arrested by men wearing the badge of House Valerian. She was clapped in chains and taken to the dungeons. She did not know that the last of her sons, King Aegon II, was already dead. He was unusually fatigued after the council meeting and was helped into his litter by Sir Giles Belgrave of the Kingsguard. Aegon asked to be taken to the castle's sept. He drank a cup of wine from a flagon of Sweet Arbor Red as he was carried there. But when they arrived, the litter's curtains remained closed and no answer came when Sir Giles spoke to the king. When Sir Giles investigated, he found the king dead with blood on his lips. And so ended the short, sad reign of King Aegon II of his name. He had ruled for only 2 years and was dead at the age of 24. The war was over at last, though the peace that followed would prove tumultuous.